when the galaxy's perfect peace shattered communications officer Sarah Chun was enjoying her morning coffee at the Deep Space Monitoring Station when the universe changed forever. The signal that burst through every receiver on Earth at exactly 847 hours was unlike anything humanity had ever received. It wasn't the usual diplomatic greeting or trade proposal that had become routine since Earth joined the galactic community 5 years earlier. This transmission carried pure terror. The emergency broadcast originated from somewhere near the galactic core, transmitted simultaneously across hundreds of frequencies with enough power to reach every civilized world in the galaxy. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted the translation protocols, watching alien symbols convert into desperate words on her screen. All civilized worlds, all member species of the Galactic Harmony Coalition. The translated message began. This is emergency. Coordinator Veltar of the Core Defense Initiative. We are broadcasting this message as our final act before evacuating the Centauri Governance Complex. The Shadow Swarm has breached our outer defenses. Sarah had never heard of anything called the Shadow Swarm, but the fear in the alien coordinators' voice was unmistakable, even through the translation software. She immediately began recording while forwarding the signal to Earth Command, the United Nations, and every major military installation on the planet. The message continued with growing desperation. In the past 14 rotations, 17 peaceful, worlds have gone completely dark. Not conquered, not occupied, but consumed entirely. The Zelani system, home to 4 billion souls, was there yesterday. Today, our long-range sensors show only empty space where their star once burned. The Harmony Collective's combined response fleets have engaged the enemy 3 times. Each encounter lasted less than 2 standard time units before our forces were completely overwhelmed. Sarah stared at the data streaming across her secondary monitors. The technical specifications accompanying the distress call painted a picture that defied comprehension. The Shadow Swarm consisted of entities that moved through space without conventional propulsion, consumed matter and energy to replicate themselves, and demonstrated a collective intelligence that adapted to every defensive strategy within moments of encountering it. The enemy shows no interest in communication, negotiation, or any form of diplomatic contact. Coordinator Veltar's message continued. They consume everything in their path, leaving nothing behind except empty space. Our scientists estimate that if their current expansion rate continues, they will reach the core worlds within 30 rotations. Over 2 trillion beings will face extinction unless this threat is stopped immediately. The technical data was staggering. The Shadow Swarm had destroyed fleets numbering in the hundreds of thousands of vessels, all crewed by species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, and technologies that seemed like magic to most humans. Yet these advanced civilizations were being swept aside as if they were insects. We are requesting immediate military assistance from all member worlds and allied systems, the message concluded. This includes recently contacted species whose technological development may offer unexpected solutions. To the representatives of Earth, specifically, your species' recent conflicts and military innovations may provide tactical approaches our peaceful civilizations have not considered. Time is running out for all life in this galaxy. Within minutes of Sarah's transmission reaching Earth Command, every government on the planet was in emergency session. President Elena Martinez stood before the United Nations Security Council. Less than 3 hours after the initial signal, her face grim as she addressed the assembled representatives. Fellow leaders, President Martinez began, we face a choice that will define humanity's place in the galaxy. Our new alien neighbors, species that have known peace for millennia, are facing extinction from an enemy they cannot understand or defeat. They're asking for our help, specifically because we come from what they call a death world and have experience with warfare that they abandoned long ago. The Brazilian representative raised his hand. Madam President, we've been part of the galactic community for only 5 years. Our technology is still centuries behind theirs. What could we possibly offer that their advanced civilizations cannot provide? Martinez smiled grimly. According to the Coalition's own reports, we offer something they've forgotten how to do. We know how to fight dirty, think unpredictably, and survive in impossible situations. While they've spent thousands of years perfecting peaceful cooperation, we've spent that same time learning how to win wars against impossible odds. The decision was unprecedented in its unanimity. Every nation on Earth voted to mobilize there. Space forces for the largest military operation in human history. Within 6 hours of receiving the distress call, shipyards on Earth, Mars, the Moon, and the asteroid belt were working at maximum capacity to prepare for war. Admiral Carlos Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the U.S. Indomitable, humanity's newest and largest warship, watching as vessels from every human colony converged on the Sol system. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. Massive dreadnoughts that had been designed to defend Earth from potential alien invasion flew alongside converted cargo haulers bristling with hastily mounted weapons. Fighter carriers launched from orbital stations, while mining ships equipped with industrial cutting lasers joined the growing armada. "Admiral," reported his aide, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, "final count shows 4,736 vessels ready for combat operations. That includes everything, from our newest battleships to civilian transports volunteering as support vessels." Rodriguez nodded, studying the tactical displays showing the enormous fleet taking formation around Earth. Each ship carried humans who had volunteered for a mission they might not survive, traveling to fight an enemy they didn't understand, to save alien civilizations most of them had never met. "Sir," Communications Officer Park announced from her station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition fleet. They want to establish contact before we depart." The main screen flickered to life, showing an alien figure that Rodriguez recognized as a member of the Aldari species. The being's elongated features and pale blue skin were common among the Coalition's diplomatic corps, but this individual's expression showed confusion and something that might have been concern. "Admiral Rodriguez," the alien said in perfect English, "I am Fleet Coordinator Xanth of the Coalition Emergency Response Force. We are surprised by the scale of your species' response to our distress call. Our records indicate that Earth has approximately 200 space-capable military vessels. Our sensors now detect nearly 5,000 ships preparing for hyperspace transit." Rodriguez leaned back in his command chair. "Coordinator Xanth, those records only account for our official military fleet. When Earth goes to war, everything that can carry weapons becomes a warship. We've converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, research ships, and even passenger liners for this operation." There was a long pause before Xanth responded. "Admiral, I must inform you that the Shadow Swarm has destroyed fleets much larger than yours. The Zelani Defense Force numbered over 50,000 vessels when they engaged the enemy. None survived. We appreciate your species' courage, but we fear you may be sacrificing yourselves unnecessarily." "Coordinator," Rodriguez replied with a slight smile, "the Coalition species have been peaceful for thousands of years. You've forgotten something that humans learned a long time ago. Sometimes the size of your fleet matters less than how willing you are to use it in ways your enemy doesn't expect." Dr. Amira Hassan worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the science vessel U.S. Discovery, analyzing every piece of data the Coalition had provided about the Shadow Swarm. As humanity's leading expert on hostile alien life forms, she had been tasked with finding weaknesses in an enemy that had already proven immune to conventional attacks. The data was disturbing. The Shadow Swarm entities appeared to be some form of space-dwelling organism that reproduced by consuming matter. and energy. They moved in coordinated groups numbering in the millions, each individual the size of a small spacecraft, but with the ability to merge into larger forms when needed. Most concerning was their apparent collective intelligence, which allowed them to share information and adapt to new threats almost instantaneously. Dr. Hassan, her assistant, Dr. Kim, called from across the lab. "I've been analyzing the battle recordings from the Coalition encounters. These things learn from every engagement. They literally become immune to any tactic used against them within minutes of seeing it." Hassan nodded grimly. "That's why conventional warfare failed against them. The Coalition species fight logically, using proven strategies and coordinated attacks. But logical warfare is predictable, and predictable tactics are exactly what this enemy can counter." She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's military history, from ancient battles to recent conflicts in the asteroid belt. "Look at human warfare, Dr. Kim. We don't fight logically. We use desperate tactics, unexpected strategies, and we adapt faster than any enemy expects. If these shadow swarm entities have evolved to counter logical, predictable warfare, they might not know how to handle complete chaos." The human fleet's journey to the war zone took 18 days of hyperspace travel, during which time the reports from the Coalition grew increasingly desperate. 3 more star systems had gone dark, including one that housed a Coalition research facility working on anti-swarm weapons. The enemy was accelerating its advance, apparently growing stronger with each victory. Captain Maria Williams commanded the destroyer UEC's Defiance, one of the smaller ships in the human fleet, but equipped with experimental weapons that Earth scientists hoped might prove effective against the shadow swarm. Her crew of 200 had volunteered for the mission, knowing they would likely face an enemy that had already destroyed millions of Coalition personnel. "Captain," reported her tactical officer, "we're receiving distress signals from the Kepler Station refugee convoy. They're requesting immediate assistance." Williams studied the sensor readings on her command screen. Dozens of Coalition civilian ships were fleeing from the latest shadow swarm attack, their vessels damaged and barely space-worthy. Some carried survivors from worlds that no longer existed, refugees from civilizations that had been completely consumed. "Helm, alter course to intercept the convoy," Williams ordered. "All ships, this is Defiance. We have Coalition civilians in distress. Begin search and rescue operations immediately." The refugee ships were unlike anything in human space. Where human vessels were built for durability and combat effectiveness, Coalition ships prioritized comfort and efficiency. They were works of art as much as spacecraft, with graceful curves and advanced systems that made human technology look primitive by comparison. But they were also fragile, designed for a galaxy where warfare was a forgotten concept. Williams found herself speaking with refugee leaders from 6 different species, each telling the same horrifying story. The shadow swarm attacked without warning, consumed everything in their path, and left nothing but empty space behind. Entire civilizations that had existed for millennia were simply gone, as if they had never existed at all. "The worst part," explained refugee coordinator Thess, a member of the peaceful Vali species, "is that they don't just destroy our worlds. They consume our history, our culture, everything that made us who we are. When they finish with a system, it's as if that civilization never existed." Williams felt a cold anger building in her chest. Humanity had only recently joined the galactic community, but these species had welcomed Earth with open arms. They had shared their knowledge, their culture, and their hope for a peaceful future. Now they were facing extinction, and they had nowhere else to turn. "Coordinator Thess," Williams said firmly, "humanity remembers every species that has shown us friendship. We're going to stop this threat, and we're going to make sure your people survive. That's a promise." As the human fleet continued toward the war zone, more refugee convoys joined their formation. The sight of thousands of human warships escorting fleeing civilians became a symbol of hope for coalition species who had begun to believe that extinction was inevitable. For the first time since the Shadow Swarm attacks began, someone was moving toward the enemy instead of running away. Admiral Rodriguez received the final intelligence briefings as his fleet approached the outer edge of swarm-controlled space. The enemy had consumed 12 more systems in the time it took the human fleet to travel from Earth, and their expansion showed no signs of slowing. Coalition long-range sensors detected swarm formations numbering in the tens of millions, all moving in perfect coordination toward the core worlds. "Admiral," reported Intelligence Officer Santos, "Coalition Command estimates we'll make contact with advanced swarm elements in approximately 6 hours. They're requesting that we coordinate our attack with their remaining defense fleets." Rodriguez considered this for a moment before shaking his head. "Tell Coalition Command that we appreciate their offer, but we'll be conducting independent operations. If we coordinate with their forces, the swarm will learn to counter our tactics just like they learned to counter theirs." The bridge fell silent as his officers processed this decision. They would be fighting alone against an enemy that had defeated every organized defense the galaxy could muster. It was either brilliance or suicide, and none of them were sure which. "Sir," Communications Officer Park announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It's marked for your eyes only." Rodriguez accepted the encrypted message from President Martinez, reading her final instructions before the battle began. Earth's leaders had authorized him to use any means necessary to stop the Shadow Swarm, including weapons and tactics that the coalition species might consider barbaric. Humanity was bringing everything they had learned about warfare to a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight for survival. As the human fleet moved into formation for humanity's first major galactic war, Admiral Rodriguez looked out at the thousands of ships under his command. Each vessel carried humans who had left their homes and families to fight for species they barely knew, in a war that would determine the fate of all life in the galaxy. The Shadow Swarm was about to discover what happened when a peaceful galaxy called upon a death world for help. Asterisk. How humans turned chaos into victory. The first contact with the Shadow Swarm occurred at 0643 hours ship time, when Captain Williams' destroyer Defiance detected massive energy signatures moving through the debris field that had once been the Aldery system. What her sensors revealed defied every assumption about space warfare that humanity had developed over centuries of conflict. The Shadow Swarm entities moved through space like a school of fish, millions of individual organisms, flowing in perfect synchronization without any apparent communication between them. Each entity was roughly the size of a human fighter craft, but they moved with organic grace that no mechanical system could match. As Williams watched, thousands of them began merging into larger forms, creating massive composite creatures that dwarfed even humanity's largest battleships. "Tactical analysis, Mr. Foster," Williams ordered her weapons officer. "Captain, I'm reading energy signatures that don't match any known technology," Foster reported, his voice tight with concentration. "These things aren't using conventional propulsion, but they're moving at combat speeds through space. No life support systems that I can detect, which suggests they can survive in vacuum naturally." Williams studied the tactical display as more swarm entities became visible on their sensors. The formations were unlike anything in human military doctrine. Instead of maintaining defensive positions or establishing firing lines, the creatures flowed around obstacles like liquid constantly, changing shape and direction in patterns that seemed random, but somehow remained perfectly coordinated. "Communications, signal the fleet," Williams decided. "All ships, this is Defiance. We have contact with hostile forces. Recommend all vessels maintain independent maneuvering and avoid predictable formations." These things adapt to patterns. So we need to stay unpredictable. Admiral Rodriguez received Williams' report aboard the Indomitable, just as his long-range sensors detected the main swarm formation. The sight was breathtaking in its scale and terror. Millions upon millions of entities moved through space in a writhing mass that stretched across several light minutes, consuming every piece of matter they encountered. Asteroids, space debris, even cosmic dust was absorbed into the collective, apparently providing energy for continued reproduction. "Admiral," reported Dr. Hassan from the science section, "I'm detecting something unprecedented. The swarm isn't just consuming matter for energy. They're analyzing everything they absorb, learning from it. When they consumed the Aldari defense platforms, they literally absorbed the tactical programming and strategic databases. This explained how the coalition forces had been defeated so quickly. The Shadow Swarm didn't just destroy enemy fleets. They learned from them, incorporating their knowledge and capabilities into the collective intelligence. Every battle made them smarter and more dangerous." "Dr. Hassan," Rodriguez asked, "what happens if they absorb information from human systems?" "That's what we need to prevent at all costs," Hassan replied grimly. "If they learn our tactics and strategies, we'll be just as helpless as the coalition forces. But there might be an advantage we can exploit. These creatures have evolved to counter logical, organized warfare. Human combat doctrine might be chaotic enough to confuse their adaptive mechanisms." Rodriguez made a decision that would either save the galaxy or doom humanity to the same fate as the coalition worlds. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez. We're going to engage the enemy using completely independent tactics. No coordinated attacks, no formation flying, no predictable strategies. Every ship fights as if they're alone against the entire swarm. Make them try to adapt to 4,000 different tactical approaches simultaneously." The order was unprecedented in human military history. Instead of fighting as a unified fleet, each ship would become its own small war, fighting with whatever tactics their individual commanders thought might work. It violated every principle of space combat that humanity had developed. But it might be the only way to prevent the swarm from learning to counter their entire fleet at once. Captain Singh of the cruiser UES Mumbai was the first to test the new doctrine. Instead of engaging the swarm entities with conventional weapons, he ordered his ship to ram directly into their formation, while firing mining charges designed to break apart asteroids. The explosions created massive debris clouds that disrupted the swarm's coordination, forcing individual entities to break away from the collective to avoid collision. "It's working," Singh reported to the fleet. "The creatures can adapt to energy, weapons, and coordinated attacks, but they struggle with random environmental hazards. They're trying to predict my next move, but I'm not making tactical decisions based on logic." Across the battlefield, other human commanders began implementing their own chaotic strategies. Captain Torres of the destroyer UES Salamanca programmed his ship's computer to fire weapons in completely random patterns, making it impossible for the swarm to predict where the next attack would come from. Commander Patel converted her cargo hauler into a massive shotgun, firing thousands of small projectiles in all directions. Simultaneously, the Shadow Swarm's response was unlike anything they had demonstrated against coalition forces. Instead of adapting quickly to the new tactics, they seemed confused by the humans' apparent lack of coherent strategy. Individual entities began separating from the main formation, each trying to counter different tactical approaches simultaneously. Dr. Hassan monitored the battle from her laboratory, analyzing the swarm's behavioral patterns as they encountered human warfare for the first time. "Admiral, I think we've found their weakness. The collective intelligence works by sharing information between individual entities, but they can only process so much data at once. When we present them with too many different tactical approaches simultaneously, their coordination breaks down." "Explain." Rodriguez ordered while watching his tactical display show the chaotic battle raging across dozens of cubic kilometers of space. Think of it like a computer trying to run too many programs at once, Hassan continued. The coalition always fought, with coordinated strategies that the swarm could analyze and counter. But we're presenting them with thousands of different tactical problems that all require different solutions. Their collective intelligence is overloading. This revelation changed everything. Instead of trying to defeat the shadow swarm through superior firepower or advanced technology, humanity was winning through sheer unpredictability. The creatures had evolved to counter logical warfare, but human combat doctrine had always included a large element of controlled chaos. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, flying one of the fleet's experimental fighters, discovered another weakness in the swarm's adaptive mechanisms. Instead of following standard attack patterns, he began using evasive maneuvers based on classical music, programming his ship's autopilot to move in rhythm with Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. "Admiral, this is Jackson," he reported over the communications channel while dodging between massive swarm entities. "They can't predict my movement patterns because I'm not using tactical logic. I'm flying to music, and they have no framework for understanding artistic expression as a combat strategy." The idea spread quickly through the human fleet. Pilots began using dance moves, poetry, and even children's games as the basis for their tactical decisions. Captain Miller programmed his weapon systems to fire in patterns based on his daughter's drawings. Commander Zhang used ancient Chinese military philosophy, but interpreted through modern chaos theory rather than traditional strategic doctrine. The shadow swarm's perfect coordination began to collapse under the weight of trying to process thousands of completely different tactical approaches. Individual entities started making contradictory decisions, some trying to merge with others that were attempting to separate. Their formation discipline dissolved as they struggled to maintain collective intelligence while analyzing incomprehensible human strategies. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez," the admiral broadcast to his fleet. "The enemy is showing signs of systemic breakdown. Continue current tactics and prepare for Phase 2 operations." Phase 2 was the most dangerous part of humanity's plan. While the swarm struggled to adapt to chaotic surface tactics, human boarding parties would infiltrate individual entities to plant explosives designed to disrupt their internal communication networks. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable standard, but the volunteers had trained for this moment during their journey from Earth. Asterisk. Sergeant Maria Vasquez led the first boarding team from the assault transport UES, Iwo Jima. Her squad of 12 Marines wore experimental armor designed to survive in the vacuum of space while providing protection against unknown alien environments. Each Marine carried weapons that had been specifically chosen because they were unpredictable: flamethrowers, explosive harpoons, and chemical weapons that the swarm had never encountered. "Remember your training," Vasquez told her squad as their boarding pod approached one of the smaller swarm entities. "These things adapt to patterns, so don't use any. Every Marine fights differently, and change your tactics every few minutes. We're not trying to destroy this thing. We're trying to confuse it long enough to plant the charges." The boarding pods, cutting laser sliced through the entity's outer membrane, revealing an interior that defied human understanding. Instead of corridors and chambers, the inside of the creature was filled with flowing organic matter that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The Marines found themselves moving through what seemed like the interior of a living cell magnified to enormous proportions. "This is incredible," reported Corporal Kim, the squad's science specialist. "The entire interior is one massive neural network. Every surface is covered with synaptic connections, processing information at incredible speeds." Vasquez led her team deeper into the entity while placing explosive charges designed to disrupt neural pathways. The creature's immune system began responding to their presence, sending antibody-like organisms to attack the intruders. But the Marines had trained for this scenario, using flame weapons and chemical agents that the creature had no evolutionary framework for understanding. Charges placed, Vasquez reported. Detonation in 30 seconds. All teams, prepare for extraction. The explosion that followed was visible from outside the entity as massive sections of its neural network overloaded and shut down. The creature's coordinated movement became erratic, and it began sending confused signals to other swarm entities in the area. Similar boarding operations were taking place throughout the battlefield as human Marines infiltrated dozens of swarm entities simultaneously. Each team used different tactics and weapons, preventing the collective intelligence from developing effective countermeasures. The creatures that survived the boarding actions were left confused and disconnected from the main swarm network. Captain Williams watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the tide of battle began to turn. The massive swarm formations that had seemed invincible were breaking apart into smaller groups that moved with less coordination. Individual entities were making tactical mistakes, flying into debris fields or colliding with each other as their collective intelligence struggled to process the chaos of human warfare. "Captain," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving transmissions from coalition refugee ships. They're asking if we're actually winning." Williams smiled grimly as she watched another group of swarm entities retreat in apparent confusion. "Tell them that Earth is just getting started." The final phase of the battle began when Admiral Rodriguez detected the swarm's command entities, massive creatures that seemed to coordinate the collective intelligence of the entire formation. These organisms were protected deep within the main swarm mass, surrounded by millions of smaller entities that served as both defenders and communication relays. "Dr. Hassan," Rodriguez called, "if we can disrupt those command entities, what happens to the rest of the swarm?" "Based on my analysis," Hassan replied, "the collective intelligence would collapse entirely. The individual entities would revert to basic survival instincts without the coordination network. They might still be dangerous, but they wouldn't be able to function as a unified force." Rodriguez made the decision to commit humanity's entire fleet to a single, massive assault on the swarm's command center. It was exactly the kind of coordinated attack that had failed when the coalition attempted it. But Rodriguez was counting on the swarm's overloaded processing systems being unable to mount an effective defense. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez. We're going to end this war with one final attack. Target the command entities at the center of the swarm formation. Use every weapon you have, every tactic you can think of, and make it as chaotic as possible. The fate of the entire galaxy depends on the next 10 minutes. The assault that followed was unlike anything in the history of space warfare. 4,000 human ships attacked simultaneously, each using different weapons and tactics that created a symphony of destruction across the battlefield. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, nuclear missiles, and exotic experimental systems all fired at once, while human fighters weaved through the swarm formation using tactics based on everything from military doctrine to interpretive dance. Shadow Swarm's collective intelligence, already overloaded by hours of trying to process incomprehensible human tactics, suffered complete systemic failure when faced with a simultaneous assault. Command entities that had coordinated the actions of millions of individual creatures suddenly found themselves unable to communicate with their own forces. The collapse was spectacular. Swarm entities that had moved in perfect coordination for millennia began flying in random directions, colliding with each other, or simply floating motionless in space. The massive formations that had consumed entire star systems dissolved into chaos as individual creatures reverted to basic survival behaviors. "Admiral," reported Dr. Hassan, her voice filled with amazement, "the collective intelligence network has collapsed completely. The individual entities are no longer capable of coordinated action. They're retreating toward the galactic rim, apparently trying to escape the battlefield. Rodriguez watched his tactical display as millions of swarm entities fled in all directions, their perfect unity shattered by humanity's chaotic approach to warfare. The threat that had seemed unstoppable just hours earlier was now a disorganized collection of individual creatures more interested in survival than conquest. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez," he announced to the human fleet. "Mission accomplished. A shadow swarm threat has been neutralized." The aftermath of humanity's victory sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Coalition species that had considered warfare a primitive relic of less evolved civilizations suddenly found themselves studying human military doctrine with intense interest. The peaceful philosophies that had guided galactic civilization for millennia were being reconsidered in light of humanity's success against an enemy that logic could not defeat. Coordinator Zanth of the Coalition Emergency Response Force met with Admiral Rodriguez aboard the Indomitable 3 days after the battle, his expression showing a mixture of gratitude and confusion that seemed to characterize most alien reactions to human tactics. "Admiral Rodriguez," Zanth said carefully, "our analysis of the battle recordings raises questions that our civilizations have never had to consider. Your species achieved victory through what appears to be controlled chaos rather than organized strategy. This contradicts everything we know about effective warfare." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, considering how to explain human military philosophy to a species that had known only peace for thousands of years. "Coordinator, the coalition species developed their tactics based on logic, efficiency, and predictable outcomes. But sometimes the most logical approach is to abandon logic entirely. The shadow swarm had evolved to counter organized resistance, but they had no framework for understanding creative chaos." "You used art as a weapon," Zanth observed, still seeming bewildered by the concept. "Your pilots flew combat maneuvers based on music and poetry. Your Marines used children's games as tactical doctrine. By what rational process can such methods be considered effective military strategy?" "That's exactly the point," Rodriguez replied with a smile. "They can't be considered rational, which is why they worked. The enemy's collective intelligence was designed to analyze and counter logical threats. When we presented them with thousands of illogical approaches simultaneously, their processing systems couldn't handle the data load." The conversation was interrupted by Communications Officer Park, announcing an incoming transmission from Earth. President Martinez appeared on the main screen, her expression showing the relief of a leader whose desperate gamble had succeeded beyond all expectations. "Admiral Rodriguez," the president said, "congratulations on humanity's first major victory in galactic politics. The Coalition Council has formally requested that Earth establish a permanent military presence in the galaxy to guard against future threats. They're also asking if we would be willing to train other species in what they're calling Death World Combat Doctrine." Rodriguez exchanged glances with Zanth, whose expression suggested that the idea of peaceful species learning human warfare techniques was both fascinating and terrifying. "Madam President, I believe we can work with the Coalition to develop defensive strategies that incorporate both logical planning and creative chaos. The galaxy needs to learn that sometimes the best way to fight an overwhelming enemy is to be completely unpredictable." The establishment of the Terran Defense Initiative marked the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. Human military advisors began working with Coalition species to develop hybrid tactics that combined advanced alien technology with humanity's gift for creative warfare. The peaceful species of the galaxy discovered that they didn't have to abandon their principles to learn how to defend themselves effectively. Dr. Hassan found herself appointed as the Director of Xenological Warfare Studies, tasked with analyzing potential future threats, and developing countermeasures that combine scientific analysis with human unpredictability. Her first report to the Coalition Council contained recommendations that would have been considered insane by pre-war standards, but now represented the cutting edge of galactic defense planning. The Shadow Swarm was just one example of how overspecialization can become a fatal weakness. Hassan explained to the assembled representatives of 47 different species. Our galaxy spent thousands of years perfecting peace, but we forgot that the universe doesn't always reward perfection. Sometimes survival requires the ability to be imperfect, unpredictable, and even chaotic. The reforms that followed transformed galactic civilization in ways that extended far beyond military doctrine. Species that had developed rigid social structures began incorporating human concepts of individual creativity and spontaneous innovation. Art, music, and literature experienced a renaissance as alien cultures discovered the power of creative expression to solve problems that logic alone could not address. Captain Williams, now promoted to Admiral and Commander of the new Terran Coalition Joint Defense Force, often reflected on the battle that had changed everything. Humanity had responded to a desperate plea for help by bringing their unique gifts to a galaxy that had forgotten the value of controlled chaos. In saving the Coalition species from extinction, humans had also given them something equally valuable: the knowledge that perfection was not always the answer to survival. The Shadow Swarm's individual entities, scattered and confused throughout the outer reaches of the galaxy, occasionally appeared on long-range sensors as they continued their retreat toward unknown regions of space. But they no longer moved in coordinated formations, and their threat to galactic civilization had been permanently broken by humanity's refusal to fight according to anyone else's rules. Earth had answered the galaxy's call for help, and in doing so had taught an entire civilization that sometimes the most powerful weapon against an overwhelming enemy was the simple human ability to think outside every possible box, to find solutions in places where logic feared to tread, and to turn chaos itself into a tool for survival. The Death World had shared its greatest gift with the galaxy, the knowledge that in a universe full of impossible challenges, the most impossible response might be exactly what survival required. Asterisk.